Welcome to Thriving Together, Stories from CCEJ, a podcast from the California Conference for Equality and Justice. Our mission is to educate and empower youth and adults to lead change for equity and justice in our communities. I'm Daniel Solis, your host. In this episode, CCEJ's executive team, Reena Hajat Carroll, myself, and Jessy Needham share reflections on how CCEJ's work to promote equity and inclusion prevents prejudice and hate. We share stories about the impact of hate on ourselves and our communities, and share our vision for how we can all work together to build a world free from hate. Let's listen.
I'm Jessy Needham. My gender pronouns are she and her.
Reena Hajat Carroll, Executive Director, CCEJ, she, her.
Daniel Solis, and my pronouns are he, him. I think the root causes of hate are complicated. I think a lot of it has to do with people being disconnected, not knowing each other, only having stereotypes and stories, right, that are told by the media, by people who are trying to actively divide us. I think that's a part of it, but I think a lot of it also just comes from oppression, right? People don't have the basic things that they need. People are feeling scared about losing the things that they fought hard to get, right? Some of that is losing privilege, but some of it is also just like, who can afford to buy a house, right? What does people's future look like? And so I think in these kinds of times, when people's just basic needs are not being met, when people are feeling threatened, it's really easy to turn to hate, to feel that other people who are different than you, who maybe you don't know, are a big threat to you, right?
I think the root causes of hate really come down to fear of the unknown, fear of difference, and at the end of the day, also just a power struggle that exists within our communities and in society at large.
I think the opposite of hate is courage. So even if we're afraid, or even if we're scared or uncomfortable, being courageous enough to let our hearts be open to someone who might look different, think different, pray differently, and welcome them as part of our community and be in relationship with them.
If people feel connected to each other, if people feel connected to their jobs, if people feel connected to their neighborhoods, if people feel connected even just to this idea of being part of a country or part of, a city or part of like a state, I think that connection is what helps people maybe have a little bit more empathy, have a little bit more grace, have a little bit more understanding. And instead of just being like, my life sucks right now because of these people, or I want to hurt people because things suck so much for me, I think then that helps people stop. It's kind of like a break, right, on that kind of approach or mindset. So, thinking about like young people in schools who bully or hurt other people or who pick on other kids, a lot of that's because they're not connected, right? They don't feel like anyone sees them, anyone values them. They don't feel like there's even a purpose for them at school, right? So I think zooming off from that to think about kind of bigger kinds of hate, I think, connection is what can stop that or slow it down at least.
So my parents are an interfaith couple. My father's Christian and my mother's Jewish, and both of European American descent. So we're white European Americans, but with different immigration stories to the US and different faith backgrounds. And it was not very common in the 1970s to get married across faith lines. One of my grandmothers didn't accept their marriage, and it caused a lot of tension in our family for many years. And I look at my parents as having a lot of courage and to still love one another and be together, even in the face of hate or bias.
So for me, I grew up in an interfaith house with a Muslim father from Africa and a Hindu mother from India. And all my life, I was involved or adjacent to conversations about religious hate, about religious diversity, about people hating that my father was Muslim, or hating that my mother was Hindu. So I was always around these conversations of what it looked like when people weren't embracing inclusivity. And then as I grew up and became an adult in my career, it was really interesting to see how there was these different layers and levels of discrimination around my look. Optically, one, I'm brown skin, right? My last name has Arabic roots. And so there was this level of discrimination that I experienced. So much so, one time I was asked to do an interview for a news station where people were shown my picture. Random strangers were shown my picture, and they had to say what they thought I was, if they thought I had money, who I was, all of these different just sort of thoughts that came up when they saw my picture. And some random person said they thought I was Osama bin Laden's cousin. So that level of hate is of course devastating, but it's also really unfortunate. And this is where we get back to this conversation of what do people need to combat hate? They need education, they need exposure, they need meaningful relationships where whatever stereotype you had growing up or just whatever your belief system is for a number of different reasons can be challenged, and you can see that there is another way, that there is another way of thinking, that different perspectives exist, and maybe what you think isn't actually the best way to think if it's rooted in hate and discrimination and bigotry.
Now, this was years ago. I was outside of like a queer bar in LA, and we were just leaving, and then we were in line to get some some like bacon hot dogs because you were hungry at that time, and all of a sudden we just hear and feel like kind of things raining down on us, and we were like, what's going on? And then we look around and we realize that there's all these eggs on the floor, and somebody had just driven by. I didn't hear it, but a friend of mine heard like some anti like LGBTQ slurs that they said, and we were just like, "Whoa, what happened?" And this was like in Silver Lake in LA, so it's a very LGBTQ friendly place. So it was just kind of felt surprising, and I think we all kind of were, I think, stunned. It just kind of was like, "Oh, this happened!" Like, then you start thinking like, "Oh, this is kind of like a hate incident. Like this is a hate crime. Like people just did this, threw things at us because we're outside a queer bar." And then you kind of just start thinking like, "Oh, am I a victim here? Did I just get attacked?" And so everyone, I think, was just kind of processing those feelings and feeling weird and I think confused. And I noticed that there was an egg by me that had not broken. It was like a whole egg. So we were still in line trying to get the bacon wrapped hot dogs. So I went to the person and I was like, "Would you mind like frying this up for us?" And bless her heart, she did. She fried it up, and so then she gave us, she split it up among us, and we all had some bacon wrapped hot dog with some fried egg from these people who were trying to like, gay bash us, for lack of a better word. And I don't know, that felt something that felt really funny and transformative, and also just felt really queer that we were able to take this thing and kind of just make not a joke of it, but kind of like defeat the purpose of it, kind of take out the evil of it that was behind it, and be like, "Thank you, we're gonna have a better meal now because of you."
Because my family is a family with a lot of different immigration histories and um, different faith backgrounds, even though we're all white and that's a privileged race in the United States, I think that the diversity within my own family and whatever adversity it created because of anti-Semitism or bias or sexism against the women in my family, it's made me more committed to being the type of person who can speak out against hate or speak out against injustice or inequity. I'm still learning how to be courageous and bold, but I think it's rooted in the belief that everyone should be free to love who they want to love, to work where they want to work, to live where they want to live. And I am committed to making sure that our communities include everybody.
The question of how I overcame sort of hate and got to where I am today is really an interesting one, in that although I grew up in so much diversity, religious diversity, regional diversity, and then I also grew up in a time where it was not uncommon for me to be the only Asian Indian in a class or in a group of friends. I think what that did over time, though, was it really wanted me, it wanted at my core to figure out, like, what does it look like to be in this world where inclusivity is more prevalent than exclusivity? And I think this is where I started really dedicating my life at the age of 16 to understand these concepts of interracial dating, of affirmative action, of what it meant to be part of the LGBTQ community for those who are part of that community. And I, at 16, organized my first conference, my first diversity conference. It was called the People of Color Conference. It was in my high school in Chicago. And it's incredible for me to now be in this same space almost 30 years later doing the same work, but I think it was ingrained in me that there was a way the communities could come together, the people could come together, and they could really value the differences, not see past the differences, but value them and value people for who and what they were. And so I think that was how I got to where I am today. But I think that value was just always so loud for me at my core, and it guided me, and it has guided me to become executive director of CCEJ, and before this, doing very similar work in St. Louis.
I mean, I think my story, like a lot of people, of CCJ starts at camp, at our camp. I think before I went to camp in high school, I was definitely like, like social justice minded. Like I cared about lots of things, and I was trying to just, make the world better and make it a fairer and just place. Before I went to Building Bridges Camp, I didn't know about like how a lot of those things that I thought were offensive, like stereotypes, or were inside of me and were affecting me. I think it was like I'm over here and I'm one of the good people trying to do things better, and then over here are the people who are bad and are ignorant, right? And then at camp, it was like, nope, we all are. We're all there. We're all the bad people and the good people, right? We all have the opportunity to choose what we do if we're honest about what we believe, and how sometimes we are scared, or we hate people, or we're ignorant, or we're avoidant, or we are just assuming that we know all about other people's lives when we have no idea, right? So I think for me that was a huge turning point where I think it became less about like, if we just fix everybody else, the world will be better. And I think it became more about like, wow, this is really complicated, and like we're all caught up in this mess. And so I think it became more about trying to do that work for myself, try to kind of undo my own, my own biases, my own stereotypes, my own privileges, right? Trying to understand like how they even showed up. And for a long time, like just to give you an example, like um, being gay, being cisgender, being a man, and how like I fit into things around sexism, and then in the '90s we weren't even talking about cisgenderism or trans issues, right? Because we were basic back then. So just to be honest, and it was hard, and I was like, wait, how could I have male privilege? How could I benefit from sexism? How could that work to keep me safe if like I didn't feel it, right? Like in the ways like my own masculinity was like constantly being devalued and undermined, and like I didn't feel like I had any power, right? And it took me a long time to figure out like there's different kinds of power, there's different kinds of privileges, right? And even if I don't have some of the ones that seem obvious, that doesn't change the fact that like I still have ideas about femininity, right, that are messed up. I still have ideas about women, right? And I have messed up ideas about trans people, right? That totally impacts how I navigate things, how I use power, how I ignore things, right? Where I decide to speak up. And so I think that's just been kind of the way of trying to fight hate in a more complicated, more honest way, instead of just kind of dividing the world into good people, bad people, right?
I think that it can be easy to fall into a pattern of believing that stereotypes about people are true, or that I have complexity in my own life that other people don't. So I think one way that I try to avoid feeling hate or feeling resentment or feeling like, quote unquote, those people are doing something to me or to my family or to my community is to individualize everybody and to understand that everyone is a unique human being a unique person with unique background, unique identities, and their actions can't be generalized to an entire group of people. So I have to start there. I have to start real small in order to keep myself from making generalizations that lead to prejudice and harm.
I think there's so many different levels of hate. I think what we're seeing right now, which is so devastating, is the physical violence and how hate is manifesting through physical violence. And I have been fortunate to not have been in a situation like that. But again, there are levels of hate that come up in so many different ways. It can come up in the form of being discriminated against at a store or on the street in public or um, in a community setting just because of the way I look, because my last name, my religious identity, my status as a first generation American, the fact that my parents are immigrants, right? There's so much there. And what's difficult, I think, is the accommodating, the acquiescing that's happening just to feel like you fit in. And that is just, it's so unfortunate. And I think, again, that's what drives me with work. It's that no one should have to accommodate. We should just be able to fit in because of who we are. There shouldn't be barriers to inclusivity.
The way the CCJ combats hate that I think is very important is that we bring people together. And I don't just mean that in like, oh, look, everyone has a different skin color, everyone has a different identity, people have different pronouns. Great, mission accomplished. I think we really work to bring people together and be like, okay, you all are different, maybe similar in some ways, and then let's get real. What is going on here? What is it that divides you? What do you think about each other? What do you fear about each other? What would it take for you to really respect and connect with each other? If you're in a school, what is it going to take for you all to do positive things at school, right? To make your school a place that welcomes and respects everybody. We do a lot of work with folks in training and workplaces, universities, and it's like, you're all here because you're trying to do some work and trying to earn money. And could it be more than that, right? Could it be a place where actually people feel respected, where people have power, where people get to control their lives and people don't just have to like disengage and kind of turn off their soul, right? And so I think we do that by saying everybody has a role in that, everybody has a responsibility in that, and everyone deserves something better. So whether or not you have privilege because of your racial identity, your gender identity, your age, whether it's because you have power because you're in charge of a place, you still deserve better. You might have more responsibility to make that happen, right? And maybe you're part of the thing that's blocking the better thing from happening. But I think at CCJ, we're like, all of us are necessary and all of us have work to do, and that work is going to look different. And some of us maybe have more ability and power to make the changes happen, but everybody's needed, right? Nobody is, disposable, for lack of a better word. And I think that's something that is, I think, important. I don't think we're the only ones doing it, but I think we've been doing it for a very long time, and I think we do it really well. And I also think we believe it. I think we really believe that like everyone is necessary.
There's no magic formula to combating hate because hate is like a virus. It'll try to attack our blood cells, our healthy blood cells. So there have to be a lot of different remedies. I think one of the remedies that CCJ offers is the idea that none of us are perfect, none of us are unflawed, but together we can have empathy and understanding for one another. And that it's worth uncovering maybe uglier parts of our history as a country or our community or uglier parts of our own heart in order to heal them and make ourselves better people and our community stronger and more united. I went like this because sometimes unity is used as like a balm to cover up, hard times or conflict. So I don't think CCEJ wants to cover up conflict. We want to unearth it so that it can be healed.
CCEJ is such a beautiful and special place because we are doing the very work of combating hate. We bring young people together, we bring adults together to have real conversations about identity, for young people in particular to explore their different thoughts and perspectives, ones that maybe they've learned at home, one they've learned from social media or from their friends, And we bring folks together so that they can talk about those things and figure out what are their own values, and then how do they want to lead this world. And we know that we're having direct impact on the hundreds of young people that come to camp, that engage with us, the hundreds, the thousands of adults that we work with in a year. And we know that if we continue to do this work, it will just continue to have a domino effect. And then at some point, we will be able to change generations, and not just us, all the organizations, all the educators, all the people in the social services and in other spaces who really believe that another world is possible and that we should be working toward that. Not just that it is possible, but that we have a role to play.
I think I just stay committed because I have seen people transform. I've been transformed, and that doesn't mean I'm not still working through things. I still don't hold bias. I feel like the person I am now is not the person, that I was like age 16 going to camp for the first time. I'm not the same person who I was like a year ago. I'm not the same person a week ago. And I think that is really inspiring because I see that in other people. I see people who've grown up kind of through this work and who are like amazing, brilliant, kind, passionate people doing amazingly good things and are healing the world. And it's just like, yeah, no, we're doing it. It's really hard, right? And people are really scared. So I think the hard parts, the adversity of it, the times that it feels like we fail, just keep me more committed to like being like, no, we got to keep going.
The reality is really, really hard. It can be really frustrating, and you can just want to throw your arms up and say, I'm done. Bridge building, diplomacy, community building, it's not working. And I think there have certainly been times in the last 4 years where I felt that way. And at the end of the day, I have to keep coming back to this, but another world is possible. I have 2 young children, and I want them to live in that world, and I want their kids to live in that world. And so if I don't every day wake up and do this work, then I'm going to do it.
I've found that the relationships that stay, the relationships that matter to me are the people who see the world as it is, who are like, we need better, we deserve better, and like, don't lose their hope in that, like they still like to cook, they just like to celebrate, some people have kids, some people have dogs, like people are still living their lives and they're still trying to enjoy the world without being like everything is so hopeless, and therefore just because there's oppression, violence, genocide happening, that doesn't mean that we also don't have like that we're not also owed the right to like to be happy, to celebrate, to feel loved, to feel connected, to have community. So I think those are the people that I feel connected to. And a lot of those people I found through people I went to camp with, people I work with here, people I worked with in the past, people I meet just randomly when we're doing the work on the community, right? There's people also that I just randomly meet at, events or the store. So I feel like you can see the people who are trying to live their lives and be better people, and also just transform the world, and not accept that we have to be divided, that we have to hate each other, that we have to just be so afraid of each other, Thank you to my fellow executive team members, Reena and Jessy, for sharing their experiences and perspectives on how we can prevent hate and prejudice. CCEJ is one of many organizations in California working to prevent hate in our communities. We're raising awareness and inspiring action during United Against Hate Week, from Saturday, September 21st through Friday, September 27th. To learn more, visit unitedagainsthateweek.org. CCEJ's podcast is sponsored in part by LA vs. Hate, a coalition of partners led by the LA County Human Relations Commission, who are committed to preventing and ending hate in our communities. Once again, I'm Daniel Solis, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to hear more stories of thriving together.